Today's lesson is lesson 67, writing tenths and hundredths as decimals. Now, as you are writing that in your book, I want you to think about it and look at it for just a minute. Something should stand out to you. Writing tenths and hundredths as decimals. What I'm hoping stood out to you was the THS and the THS. Tenths and hundredths. We have already talked about both of these. Now we're going to work a little bit with actually writing them and fully understanding how we're going to represent them as we work with them throughout the rest of the year. So again, lesson 67, writing tenths and hundredths as decimals. Well, let's start off by just looking at a common fraction. For example, we're working with the tenths. So go ahead and write down 1/10. That's easy. We've read them before. You know that's the first place after the decimal is the tenths place. So we would write it as a fraction, 1/10. When we write it as a decimal, it's decimal point and then a 1. That would be 1/10. So if you're noticed, this digit right here is what we write. Now, because we are past the decimal point, we are not at a full 10/10 would equal 1, and we would write that with the decimal after it. So you've got to understand that that first place is going to be tenths. We say it like this, and we write it like this. Now you can write it in the fraction form, but then you're not writing a decimal. So if we were looking at the fraction 3/10, how would you write that as a decimal? Hopefully you wrote 0.3. So that's the easy one as far as looking at it just with portions of a number, parts of a number. In this case, we're dealing with tenths of a number. And just to make sure that you kind of are seeing it as a whole thing as well, over here I want you to go ahead and draw a rectangle. Split it into 10 pieces. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then you would fill in 3 of them. 1, 2, 3. So that's 3/10. Written out as a picture, written out as a fraction, and written out as a decimal. So if you can understand that, then basically it's going to be easy to move to 1/100ths because that is the same idea. Remember, math is not thinking hard, it's thinking smart and finding patterns. Now that you understand what the 1/10 looks like, where again, 1/10 is the same thing as 1/10, you just have to understand that when you move to the hundredth, it's going to look similar, but it'll be a little different. Because here if we have 1/100, that's like saying 1 out of 100. And our decimal is going to look a little different. Here is my decimal point, the tens place, and then the hundredths place. So 1/10, the decimal, and then the tens place, 1/100th, the decimal, the tens place, and the hundredths place. So you have to understand that 0 is going to be extremely important to show that we are in the hundredths place. So that would also then see, if you're going to look at a fraction that is, we'll say 4/100ths, it would be 0.04. Now here's one thing that I've told my students in the past, just a little trick to help you out, is the decimal is your 1, then you place this down, so the decimal is your 1, there's a 0 left, and the 4 takes the place of the last in the hundredths. So I'll do another one for you just to make sure you've got that. So if I say 7 hundredths. Well, I'm writing that by saying there's my 1 for my decimal. My decimal's going to come down in, my 1's going to come down in a decimal. The 7 goes over to the far 0, leaving me 1 0 to deal with. So it would be written as 0.07 is 7 hundredths. And here's that same idea when you're dealing with a different number. If it was like 24 hundredths, well, it's the same principle. I would have my 1 is my decimal, except here it's the 4 and the 2 are replacing those 2 zeros. So it would be 24 hundredths. And if I had 76 hundredths, same thing. And my 7 and my 6 replace those 2, and the 1 comes down as the decimal. So that 76 hundredths, if I have 7 tenths, well, it's going to be the same thing. My 1 is my decimal, the 7 covers that one, and it is 7 tenths. So I hope you're seeing that really it is just a pattern. The decimal number, you have to go in order. The first number in is the tenths place, tenths place, tenths place. The second number in is the hundredths place, hundredths place, and in this one there is no hundredths place. Then to read the decimal, you would say the number and the last place value. So for this one, it would be, I would say 24. The last place value is the hundredths, so 24 hundredths. 76, last place value is hundredths, so 76 hundredths. Here, 7, last place value is 1, or the tenths, I'm sorry, so it would be 7 tenths. So it's really easy if you can keep in mind how to form the decimal like we did across here, how to form the decimal when you have a fraction, and then how to read the decimal, which is you read the number and say the last place value. So that'll be, I think, easy enough to understand. Let's just take a look one more time at, let's go to 1,000s, just because math isn't thinking hard, it's thinking smart and finding patterns. So to find the pattern, let's do it this way. For tenths, by the way, I'm putting my slant just so you don't lose it in the lines that are drawn. For hundredths and for thousandths. So draw them all out just like that, write them all out just like that, and turn the first one into a decimal. I'll give you a second to go ahead and write it, just write it right underneath, and yours should look like that. 4 tenths. It's in the first place after the decimal. Go ahead and do the 4 hundredths. And hopefully yours looks like this. I say the number and the last place value, which is hundredths. Now again, math isn't thinking hard, it's thinking smart and finding patterns. So go ahead and do the last one. And there you would have 4 thousandths. Again, the 4 is going out. You have the 2 zeros, and then the 1 is your decimal point. Decimal point reminder. Here, 1 0, decimal point reminder. Here, no zeros, just a decimal point reminder. So that is how you write and read and recognize decimals in the tenths and hundredths spot.